84 pretty damn quick. And so that's the platform that I use. I'm a geriatrician, which is an endangered species. There aren't many of us out there. But I think it's very important to my task, and the purpose that I will be putting is that aging is so important because it's not a disease. So you have to think of a whole new paradigm, is the operative word, of health. That's the replacement paradigm. Health instead of disease. So that feeds into the wonderful work that's going on here. And this is truly transformative. I was a good friend of a great man by the name of John Gardner, and John used to say, he who would affect social change cannot be a short wind. And we're all looking at ourselves and our society in this mirror that commands immediate attention. And we're stuck with that because we know all the problems. And I'll brag about a book I'll be talking about, which Beth did not mention, but it's my magnus opus. And I wrote this for Oxford Press a couple of years ago. Fabulous book.
I didn't mention it, sorry. Next medicine, please, everybody. Can we pass it around? Do you need it? Yeah,
Mike McGinnis of the IOM wrote my introduction. He said, this is the book that Osler would have written had he been here. That was very good stuff. Anyhow, here's my talk. I was a close friend of a guy by the name of George Sheehan. Those runners in the audience remember his name. George was a reformed cardiologist from Red Bank, New Jersey, but also a high school half miler. So he gave up his cardiology and started preaching the gospel of fitness. And George was brilliant. He was a scholar and a very impassioned runner. His book, Running and Being, is kind of the zen of running. It was on the New York Times bestseller list. I still would recommend it to you, Running and Being. And George and I and he used to write monthly columns for Runner's World, and I do today. But George then was dying of prostate cancer, and I was trying to take care of him transcontinentally. Doctors are terrible patients, as you know. But George, as he was dying, he said, Walter, I've looked deeply into my life, and I recognized some stuff that life was fabulous when I was 5. The world was so good. My bed was dry, and I had a bunny, and my folks were nice to me, and I was great when I was 5. But then I turned 6, and nothing's ever been the same since. So what the hell happened between 5 and 6? He said, I've pondered that deep and long. He said, I figured it out. And what it is when I turned 6, I stopped asking why and started asking how. And the difference between how and why is critical to my talk. Because until now and in now, we're so preoccupied with the hows, the presents, that we forget the big questions. And Nietzsche wrote, a person who has a why in life can put up with any how. So look deeply into what we do as we get up in the morning. And are we so preoccupied with kind of whether there's gas in the car, and we lose sight of these issues that Beth and all are bringing to us. So this is a why test. And I'm a geriatrician, and I grew up as a physician's son, and Dad was a very precocious geriatrician back in the 70s and 60s and 50s. Dad was a co-founder of the AARP because he gave it a biologic formation. Ethel Percy Andrus, who's the anointed godmother of AARP, cared about the finance, and she did marvelously with Social Security and Medicare. So AARP has been very profoundly shaping of our financial security as we get it magnificently so. But it has languished scientifically, and early in my career, geriatrics, aging was a black hole. It had no science behind it. We didn't know what the hell it was, whether it was a curse or what it was. But now we know, and I just last week, 2 weeks ago, I was in Washington with my friend Leonard Hayflick, who's the cell biologist who discovered the Hayflick limit, that cells have a finite number of replications. And so Leonard and I put on a program on the thermodynamics of aging, which is kind of what I'm going to spill over on you all. But he wrote this paper, said, now we know what aging is. I was a good friend of a great man by the name of Norman Cousins. And Norman was the editor of the Saturday Review of Literature. And Norman used to tell the story of Johnny, who was a very dissolute student who was over in the corner, who was found by his mother one day being productive. She says, something's bad here. What are you doing over there, John? So Johnny says, don't bother me, Mom. I'm into something good. You tell me this minute what you're doing, Johnny said. Well, Mom, if you got to know, I'm drawing a picture of God. So she turns and says, John, that sounds like something you'd be doing because nobody knows what God looks like, and he says they will when I get time. So I've adapted that very statement for what I'm talking to you about health. We have not known what health is until now. We are the first generation in the history of the human race that knows what a whole human life can look like. Know that. We didn't know how long we could live. We didn't know why we were dying. We were just like ping pong balls in an air current being tossed vaguely about with a very, very insubstantial effort to address it. But Leonard says now we know, and he then, as I have, mobilized the second law of thermodynamics. Here's our good friend Albert looking at aging, and his first two efforts to define it, aging equals MA squared, was wrong because A was disease. And aging is not a disease, so he was wrong on that account. His second one was MV squared, and B is genetics. And that the whole medical enterprise has been seduced and overcome by the genomania that has been so destructive intellectually and fiscally to our progress, because genes aren't very important. It ain't the cards you're dealt that matters, it's how you play the hand. And we're just now learning that. It's epigenesis, not genes. So now we know what aging is. So I'm an insurgent, as these guys are. So join the insurgency. And one of my heroes is Thomas Kuhn. Kuhn was a historian of science. He was at the University of Chicago. He studied out our way a while. And he wrote that important book, The Structure of Scientific Revolution. You should all have that book in your libraries, The Structure of Scientific Revolution. Because Thomas Kuhn then says, whenever a society recognizes that there's something rotten, it is not adequate or even permissible to turn the cheek and go on. You must stand to the moment. We must say no more. And he uses the American Revolution of 1776. So there were people gathered and said, we're not going to put up with this crap anymore. So they sat around a table and wrote the Declaration of Independence. Now to do that, they needed two things. The first thing they needed was an agreement. So all 13 colonies had to say, we, the undersigned, hereby say we are independent. But that wasn't enough. And here's where the story gets more interesting. Because Kuhn says it's not enough just to throw sand in the face of your adversary. You must have a place to go. You must have a replacement. So if we're saying the entire medical enterprise sucks right now, it's not enough just to holler that. We got to say, what are we going to do with what is necessary? So what's the replacement paradigm? And I ask you, health. Is that novel? Is that something? But it's right. I was giving a talk at Meharry, which is important because it's one of the only two all-black medical schools. And I was giving my talk in front of 100 freshman students. And I looked up in the audience like yourselves, and I said, I was in your chair 55 years ago. But I looked up, it was a very different audience. They were women, and they were black, I'm white, south, I'm north. They're young, I'm old. So we had these important demographic differences between them and me, and I was reflecting on how different they were from me 50 years, and I say, yeah, we're very different, but we share the same mission. So the mission of medicine has not changed since Hippocrates to us and into the indefinite future. So if you accept that, what is the mission of medicine? I said, oh, that's pretty sexy. But I said, I don't know what it is. I've never seen it rendered explicit. So I made it up. The mission of medicine is the assertion and assurance of the human potential. The assertion and assurance of the human, what we can be and what allows us to be what we can be. Some see things as they are and ask why, others see things as they might be and ask why not. So we're in that era, we're in that transformative moment. And you guys here and ladies are right front and center in this transformation. So I pulled my Achilles tendon off skiing in Vermont when I was in my 40s, and I had the cast kind of off my leg, and I looked down at my leg, and it was all shriveled and painful and purple. I said, who the hell's leg is that? It was an old leg. If it wasn't old, it was the other leg was fine. Nor was it the fact that I pulled my Achilles tendon off, because the surgeon could have put the cast on a good leg and it would have gotten old too. So it struck me that what I perceived as aging wasn't aging at all. It was disuse. So I wrote my first important paper in JAMA in 1982 called Disuse and Aging. And really effectively it was, I went to the Stanford Library, got all the books out on aging, and then I was close to NASA because Moffett Field is not our way. And we were just birthing space medicine at that time. So I had all the space medicine stuff, and space medicine is accelerated disuse. Because when you're up in space, you don't do anything. You become a jellyfish, you float. There's no gravity driving you down, so you piss out calcium by the grams, because you don't need a skeleton anymore. You float. So why need calcium? Get rid of it. So I wrote this paper, Disuse and Aging, and on this page these are the changes of disuse, and these are the pages of aging. Same risks. What the hell is all of that? What is that? So it then drove me into looking at the primary issues of aging. And what are the primary? Three: time, space, and energy. So I then found that they are codified in what's said to be the second law of thermodynamics, which says that order goes inevitably over time to disorder. And our word for that's entropy. So I wrote a paper called Aging is Entropy, an inevitable decay of matter over time. So I was musing on all of this, and this fellow, Erwin Schrödinger, a quantum physicist from Austria, gave a talk at Trinity College in Dublin in 1944 called What is Life? So I wanted to talk from his podium, which I did, and it's on my website. There's this video of my talk, and my title was The Plasticity of Human Aging. When we were kids, we all looked like Winston Churchill. But as we get old, we look very different. So the heterogeneity of old people is manifest. That is codified through the second law of thermodynamics. But my friend Freeman Dyson, who has Einstein's chair at Princeton, followed up on it and said, it's not the origin of life, it's origins too. He bifurcates the definition into metabolism and replication. So he says it really is two phenomena. One is kind of how the engine is running, the other is how does it assure replication. So this is my effort to